My bloods came back with one line flagged low, and I filed it away like it was nothing. 3 months later, that same number had halved. No symptoms, nobody chasing it, including me. 13 years of NHS blood tests, off all my medication since February 24, and I still missed this one. It's one bloke's panel, not a study. Here's what that number was doing while every other marker was the best it had been. The January result, I skimmed past. The April panel where my HbA1c came back at 37, down from 46, and one line sat on the floor. And the GP conversation that should have happened 3 months earlier, which is exactly why you don't sort this out yourself. Starting with January and the bit of that letter that I didn't read properly. January 25, results back from the surgery, HbA1c 40. 13 months earlier that number had been 46, which is pre-diabetic, which is where I'd been parked for the best part of a decade. Over 4.5 stone off every tablet since February 24, I typed HbA1c blood test results explained into Google more times than I'd like to admit, and for the once, the answer was a good one. Then one line further down the page, Ferritin 18.4. The reference range starts at 30, so that's low, flagged low, printed in black and white on a letter that I read all the way through. And I did nothing. Not I meant to and forgot about it. I read it, thought a bit low that, and got on with my day. Because everything else on the page was the best it had looked since 2012. When most of a page is moving the right way and one line isn't, you don't hear an alarm, you just hear background noise. Here's what I assumed without ever really thinking about it. If a result matters, somebody chases it. The surgery rings, a letter turns up, something happens. And I'd spent 13 years watching the NHS do exactly that. So it wasn't a daft assumption. Nobody rang, and I was that pleased with the rest of the page that I didn't ring either. 3 months on, next panel, same story. Better numbers, and that one line had moved again. It had halved. December 23, Ferritin was 141, middle of the range. No notes, nothing to look at. That's the last time that number was anywhere near normal. January 25, 18.4. April 25, 8.9. Reference range starts at 30, so 8.9 is about 70% below the bottom of normal. And from January to April, over roughly 3 months, it had dropped by 52%. Now put that next to what's the rest of that April letter said. HbA1c, 37, lowest reading in 13 years of records. CRP at 1, which is about as quiet as inflammation gets. And I knew that because I'd gone looking myself. What are inflammation markers in a blood test? That sort of search on my own at 10:30 at night. Weight around 13 stone. Over a year off everything. Not all of it was tidy, mind. Cholesterol was still 7.11, still high. Triglycerides had gone up, not down. So it wasn't a clean sweep, and I'm not going to pretend that it was. But there was no line on that page that read, this one is falling off a cliff. Every result gets its own tick or its own flag, on its own, in its own row. Nothing on an NHS printout draws you an arrow between January and April and says, look at the slope. And this is the bit I got wrong. So I'll say it plainly. I'd been comparing my numbers to the normal range for years. I'd sat there checking the fasting glucose blood test normal range against my own results like it was a school report. In range, good. Out of range, look into it. What I never did was compare a number to itself. 18.4 is a low number. 18.4 heading to 8.9 is a completely different thing. Same marker, same person, 3 months apart, and I only ever looked at each result on its own. Something did happen though, and I want to be fair to my GP here. In late March, a set of tests was requested, repeat bloods, and a caloric screen alongside them, which is one of the things you look for when iron is disappearing and nobody knows where it's going. That screen came back on the 16th of April, negative. Reviewed by a GP, marked no further action. Patient informed. And I read negative and heard sorted. One possible cause got ruled out properly. The number itself carried on sitting on the floor. But the last thing written on the file said no further action. And it's remarkable how quickly 3 words like that will close a thing down in your head. Now, when I did finally sit up and pay attention to it, I blamed the wrong thing entirely. I blamed the fasting. Of course I did. It was the obvious answer. And it was sat right there, long fast, eating in a window, a lot less red meat than I used to put away. And I spent a fair while wondering whether the thing that had taken me off all my medication had quietly cost me something else on the way. Here's what I should have known, and it isn't my opinion, it's NHS guidance. When iron stores come back low, the job is to find out what's causing it, not just top it up and move on. And the guidance is fairly blunt about diet, as it turns out. For a grown man eating almost no iron at all, you'd be looking at years before it showed up in your stores. Years, not a few months of a shorter eating window. What it points at instead is blood loss. For men and for women past the menopause, the commonest reason is bleeding you haven't noticed. For younger women, it's usually periods. Either way, the instruction is the same. Find out which. Which, as it turned out, was me. Bleeding piles. Chronic, low-level blood loss. Going on for months. And the sort of thing you can have without ever really registering it. My GP found it by investigating properly rather than guessing. And it was dealt with in November of last year. Bleeding stopped. My GP put me on iron afterwards to build the stores back up. Nothing whatsoever to do with anything that I was eating. And I'll say this clearly because it matters. That's my answer. It isn't yours. For some people, it will be the eating pattern. And that is exactly why you get it looked at instead of guessing in either direction. So that's the illness sorted. Cause found, cause treated. Iron on the way back up, file closed. November 25. Here's the bit that actually bothered me. And it happened 6 months after all that. May this year, I'm at my desk putting 13 years of NHS results into one file so that for once they'd all be in the same place instead of scattered across a decade of envelopes. Ferritin went in January 25, 18.4, April 25, 8.9. First time both of them had been in cells next to each other. And I sat back in the chair because the piles were fixed. That whole thing was months behind me and I was sat there looking at a drop I had never once seen as a drop. 13 months, 2 letters, 1 drawer. 4 feet from where I do all my tracking, and nobody had ever put those 2 numbers on the same line. Not the surgery, not me. The illness got sorted, the blind spot didn't. That's a rotten little feeling, finding the thing you missed in your own filing 6 months after somebody else had fixed the consequence of it. I'll be straight with you, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, and I've never been on a morning TV sofa. I'm a 53-year-old Yorkshireman who got fed up and fixed it with data. If that sounds like your kind of content, subscribe. New videos every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. So how does a number fall that far for that long without anybody noticing? Including the bloke obsessed with tracking. Because I felt fine. That's it. That's the whole of it. Imagine you had to wait for your engine to seize before you found out it was low on oil. You'd never run a car like that. You'd check it, you'd watch the light, you'd listen for the noise. But that's more or less how most of us treat our own bodies. And I include myself in that. The seizing isn't the problem. The seizing is the late notification. Iron stores work the same way. You've got a reserve. The reserve can run right down while you carry on feeling perfectly normal, because the thing that makes you feel ill is what happens after the reserve has gone. Feeling fine at 18 tells you nothing about what's coming at 8.9. I can't tell you what your numbers mean. This is one bloke's panel and 13 years of records, not a trial, but I can tell you the mistake because I made it twice in the same story. First, I read a result and didn't look at where it was heading. Then I decided I already knew why and was wrong about that as well. A number on the floor is a question. It isn't a diagnosis, and it certainly isn't a verdict on whatever you happen to be doing at the time. What I'd do differently, if I was starting the tracking again tomorrow, I'd change one thing. I'd stop reading results as a pass or a fail against the range, and I'd start reading them as a direction. A low number that's been low for years is one situation. A low number that's got lower is a different situation entirely. And you cannot see the difference from a single letter. If I'd repeated that ferritin in February instead of waiting for the next routine panel, I'd have seen the slope with 2 months still on the clock. If you're already tracking, if you've got a marker that's got flagged once and nobody has mentioned since, and it's never been repeated, that's the one I'd look at first, especially if something else has changed. New eating pattern, a lot of weight off, a medication stopped. But don't do what I did and decide you already know why. If I was sat looking at my own data and I saw a low result that had never been checked twice, I'd want to ask my GP to find out what's causing it. Not a supplement, not a theory, an investigation. And if you've never had any of this tested, this is the bit I'd want to hear if I were 40 and none of this was on my radar yet. Feeling fine is not evidence. It's a lovely thing and I hope it lasts you decades, but it's not the same as the numbers being fine. And my own records say so in black and white. If your energy has been slightly off for no reason you can name, not ill, not stressed, just not right, that's not a diagnosis and it's not something to panic about. It's a decent reason to be curious and to find out what your baseline actually is while everything still feels normal. Because a baseline is only any use if you took it before you needed it. If you want to start reading your own results the way I read mine now, as a line rather than a snapshot, I put the tracker I use from blood tests in the description. It's free. Put your last 2 panels into it and you'll see straight away whether anything is drifting. And the serious bit, because this one matters. Educational content only, it's not medical advice. Never stop or change medication without your GP's supervision. I stopped my own meds in Feb 24 on my own initiative and I told my GP afterwards, and that's not the approach I'm recommending to anyone. Speak to your GP before changing your fasting pattern, diet or medication. And specifically on this one, if a result of yours comes back low, please don't do what the internet will tell you and go and buy something to fix it. I ended up on iron, but only after a GP had found out what was actually wrong and dealt with it. The number was never the problem, the bleeding was. Take the results to your GP and let them find the why. That's the conversation that I should have had in the January.